The Temperate Grasslands by Nicole Matsumoto, Kaylee Kong, and Julia O'Dees. Here is some information on location and climate. The temperate grasslands are mainly located throughout the Midwest Plains and the southwest areas of the United States. The climate is drastically different between the winters and the summers. Winters are dry and cold, sometimes dropping to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Summers are wet and hot, and can reach up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The land is also filled with extremely fertile soil. Background information on organisms. Grassland forms are located in the temperate grasslands because they have the ability to survive through wildfires. Some animals found in this biome include bison, wild horses, hawks, mountain lions, and prairie dogs. Animals in this biome must adapt to living in varying climates through droughts and wildfires. Most of the organisms live off of grass and of similar plants. Food web. A food web is a graphical model depicting the many food chains linked together to show the feeding relationships of organisms in an ecosystem. At the bottom of the food chains are the decomposers, which can include termites and beetles. The decomposers produce vital nutrients for the producers. In the next line are the producers, which include spores, bluestem grass, clover, coneflowers, sunflowers, and indigo. The producers get their nutrients from the decomposers. In the next line, you have the primary consumers. Primary consumers only eat plants. On the farthest left, you have the prairie dogs, which eat spores, bluestem grass, clovers, and indigo. Next to the prairie dog, you have the pika. The pika eats spores, bluestem grass, clover, coneflowers, sunflowers, and indigo. Next to the pika, you have the red-breasted nuthatch. The red-breasted nuthatch eats everything but the spores. Next to this, you have the East checker spot. The East checker spot eats all the producers shown in this food web. To the very right, you have the squirrel, which eats everything but the spores. On the next level, you have the secondary consumers. Secondary consumers are organisms, primarily animals, which eat primary consumers. On the very left, you have the swift fox. The swift fox eats prairie dogs, East checker spots, and squirrels. Next to that, you have the rigtail. The rigtail eats the pika and the squirrel. Next to that, you have the western whiptail. The western whiptail eats the pika, the red-breasted nuthatch, and the East checker spot. Finally, on the very right, you have the pine marten, which eats the pika and the squirrel. On the topmost level are the tertiary consumers. Tertiary consumers are animals that feed mostly on secondary consumers. On the very left is the lynx. The lynx eats the swift fox. In the middle is the coyote. The coyote eats the rigtail and the western whiptail. On the right is the mountain lion. The mountain lion eats the rigtail, western whiptail, and pine marten. Competition. Competition in an ecosystem is when animals compete with each other for a food source in order to survive. In the temperate grasslands, the mountain lion competes with the lynx for their prey, a bird. Either the mountain lion or the lynx will succeed, and if one organism loses, over time it will die. Predation. In predation, a predator animal attacks its prey. In the temperate grasslands, the mountain lion hunts for its prey, the deer. There is a constant balance in the community of both animals because they depend on one another. If the deer dies out, the mountain lions will too, if this is their only food source. Parasitism. In parasitism, an organism feeds off of another organism. In this relationship, one organism benefits and the other one is harmed. In this bio, ticks feed off of the mountain lion. Mutualism. In mutualism, both members of the relationship benefit. In the temperate grasslands, birds eat ticks off of the lynx. This benefits the bird because ticks are a source of food for them. This also helps the lynx because they can get rid of the ticks without doing anything. Commensalism. Commensalism is defined as a relationship where one organism benefits from the action and the other organism does not benefit, but also is not harmed. In this ecosystem, after a prairie dog dies, The black-footed ferret takes the burrow made by the prairie dog to use for their own shelter. This relationship does not affect the prairie dogs because they are killed by an outside source, and therefore do not need their burrows anymore. Patterns of dispersion for prairie dogs. Prairie dogs are classified as a clump dispersion because they usually travel in groups. Some areas of the temperate grasslands, there are clumps of prairie dogs living together, but in other areas, there are no sighted prairie dogs anywhere. This is shown through the two images on both sides of the screen. There are clusters of dots together, representing the prairie dogs, but there are multiple places around the clusters that are completely white, showing that the prairie dogs don't really separate when they move around. Clump dispersions means that the prairie dogs have a high density in their population because there is a large number of prairie dogs per unit in an area. Clump dispersion is the most common in nature because resources typically are not evenly spread throughout an area. Survivorship curve of prairie dogs. Prairie dogs are a common animal among those living in the temperate grasslands. They follow the type 2 curve for survivorship because they do not necessarily survive through their adult ages, but do not die at the beginning of their lives either. The line goes diagonal, so the death rate is constant. Over time, prairie dogs die, but they do not die out extremely fast at the beginning of their lives, like fish and turtles do. They are classified as a type 2 survivorship curve because they are not born among many other siblings and die out fast like type 3. But they are also not born with only one or two siblings, like type 1. Their litter size is an average of 3 or 4 prairie dogs per mother. Nitrogen cycle. In the nitrogen cycle, with nitrogen limitations, this leads to competition between microorganisms and plants. With a short supply, this limits the growth of plants. Plants take in about 67% of their nitrogen from the 0 to 5 centimeter soil and 33% from the 5 to 15 centimeter layer. Most of the animals in the temperate grasslands eat grass or plants, and when the plants are consumed, some of the nitrogen containing molecules are passed to the animals, but most of what is not used in the energy production is returned to the soil through animal waste, and so the nitrogen returns to the soil, completing the cycle. Carbon cycle. In the carbon cycle, the main sources of carbon in the temperate grasslands are the burning of carbon in wildfires, the soil, and cellular respiration. Sinks are very important for the storage of carbon. Sinks include the grass, natural vegetation, soil, fossil fuel, and etc. Animals exhale carbon dioxide, which releases the gas into the atmosphere, and due to photosynthesis, plants intake carbon dioxide and use it to make energy for itself. Also, a fossil fuel. When an animal or plant dies, it gets decomposed, releasing an abundance of carbon dioxide. Water cycle. In the water cycle, water runs through the grass coming off into a stream, into a bigger body of water, and goes back to the atmosphere when water evaporates. The water vapor forms a cloud. Due to the condensation and the gas turns into a liquid. Clouds produce precipitation, and water comes from the atmosphere, especially in the winters, when the grasslands are very wet. Human disturbance turning grasslands into farmland. Farming is taking over the temperate grasslands. One major issue that the temperate grasslands are currently facing is the human interaction with this biome and people's desire to turn the land into farmland. The Great Plains in the U.S. are under a big threat due to overplowing. A recent study in 2016 showed that 3.7 million acres in the Great Plains have already been turned into farmland in just 2015 alone. This is very harmful for animals because farmers are taking away their food sources. This is especially affecting songbirds and monarch butterflies in the Great Plains, as well as bison. There used to be 60 million bison that graze the temperate grasslands in the United States, and now there are only about 200,000 bison. Furthermore, this affects plants as well, which are dying out due to overplowing and overgrazing of farmland. This overplowing of land makes the soil less fertile, so it becomes a more unfavorable climate for plants. This human disturbance needs to be immediately addressed, as both plants and animals are on the way to extinction. Here are some of the sources we used throughout the presentation. Thanks for watching.